This video illustrates how to attempt narrative writing questions in your English language IGCSE and O-Levels exam. The question tests the following writing assessment objectives: articulate, experience, and express what is thought, felt, and imagined. Organize and structure ideas and opinions for deliberate effect. Use a range of vocabulary and sentence structures appropriate to context. So, at this level, you should have an advanced vocabulary. Your sentence structure should be proper. Use register appropriate to context. Make accurate use of spelling, punctuation, and grammar. What is narrative writing? Narrative is a piece of writing that tells a story containing a sequence of connected events which may be real or imaginary. Before you start attempting the narrative question, you must know the features of narrative writing. You must have interesting characters, a story setting, a storyline, exposition, conflict, climax, resolution. These are the terms we will be discussing in this video. You must know how many voices there are, who is narrating the story, one or two persons or three. There must be a proper structure. Where does your story begin? What happens next? The sequence of events must be clear before you start attempting the question. Structure must be secure, well balanced, and carefully managed for deliberate effect. The plot must be well defined and strongly developed with features of fiction writing such as description, characterization, and effective climax and convincing details. If you have covered all these elements, you will secure a high band. These are some of the sample questions from English Language IGCSE 0500 and O Levels English Language 1123. Once you have selected the question to attempt, you are going to brainstorm the ideas. Since you're writing a narrative story, you must think of a plan. You must think about the sequence of events that will happen in your story. You may start your story in the first person narrative, that is I, or third person narrative, that is he, she, or they. First person narrative means story will be narrated in the words of a single character and the character is in some way involved in the story. The advantage of this kind of narration is that the reader can identify and sympathize with the narrator quickly. Third person narrative is a complex approach. In this, the narrator shows complete understanding of all that is happening to the characters involved in the story. This is an impersonal viewpoint. Narrative writing is complex, especially if it follows a time constraint. So, you must attempt this question if you feel fully confident that you can do justice to the subject and to your ability in the time available. You may add dialogue. Dialogue is not added just because it is a feature of narrative writing. It is used to lighten a lengthy narrative. It allows the story to gain pace. You must only use dialogue if you have practiced your punctuation well. The tone or register that you use in your story is very important. It builds the atmosphere in the story. It also conveys the character and personality of the person telling the story. Narrative questions are often asked in terms of personal experiences. For example, write a story of what happened when you were accused of something you had done. In such stories, you're supposed to include your thoughts, feelings, and reactions. Remember, they do not have to be true. You may make it up or base it on something that happened to a relative. What is important is that you make it sound as if it happened to you. When planning your story setting, you must know how much and what to write in your story setting. When you describe an event, a personal event, you need to keep your readers in mind. They do not know the circumstances that led to the event or the surroundings in which it occurred. They do not know the personalities or relationships between your characters. You must decide how much the reader needs to know. You must set a scene before starting on the main part of your account, but not too much that you overshadow the main incident. It is very important to plan the sequence of events, at what point your story will begin, at what point you will conclude. Will you give the complete resolution or will you leave the readers in suspense? The following story sample is written by James Herriot. in which he records an amusing incident in the early 1950s involving his young son Jimmy. Now, let's look at the story beginning. The story is set in a small consulting room. The writer is using the first person narrative as he's sharing his own experience. The setting of a story simply means the place in which the events of the story happen. It is very important that the setting is convincing to the reader and it must be consistent and appropriate to the events that are being described. We notice a correct use of hyphen. A hyphen is not really a punctuation mark, it is a way of linking an extended part of the sentence to the previous sentence. Its main use is to show where there is an interruption to the intended structure of a sentence. For example, when an afterthought is added or an interruption occurs. The characters are to be introduced in the beginning of the story, and it is very important that the characters are portrayed as believable human beings within the setting. The characters must be convincing. They must be ordinary human beings so that the reader can relate to them. We notice in the story that there is a proper structure. We are considering the way in which the planned sequence of events develop. So, a successful story does not have to cover a range of exciting action leading to a climax. It can be simple, it can be a simple story that leads to a problem and then a resolution of the story. It can be as simple as an everyday action, like we see in this story, where a simple action by a child, which is very believable at the child of this age, is being performed, and we see the reaction of the characters surrounding the scene. The language used must be appropriate to the scenes that are being described. Here we notice that the scene being described or the character being described is believable, the description is appropriate, and we see a child behaving according to his age. He's inquisitive, he's curious of what is happening inside the consulting room. There are sudden happening, sudden shift of scene to engage the reader in what is happening. Like in the line that says, a small head appeared for a moment at the window which overlooked the sunlight garden. So, such scenes are appropriately crafted to keep the reader engaged and see what happens next. Good description here and there can create imagery, but we must keep in mind that too much detail for the description will take away space. And since this is short story and there is time constraint in your exam, you must keep track of the scenes that are being described. Look at the description of the branches of the creeper. The branches of the beautiful creeper curled all over the back of the house, and though they were as thick as a man's leg near ground level, they became quite slender as they made their way up past the bathroom window to the tiles of the roof. This is not an irrelevant description because the creeper plays an important role in the climax of the story. So it is very important to understand what needs description and how much description must be put in where. There is good use of literary devices for description. There is use of simile as thick as a man's leg near ground level. Here, the branch is being compared to a man's leg. They become quite slender as they made their way up past the bathroom window, is giving the exact position of where the branches are. There is apt use of dialogue, they have been properly punctuated, and we see that they control the pace of the story. With the point, the writer is skillfully switching from one scene to another, keeping balance between both. There is use of effective vocabulary words such as leering, deference, byplay, show the good command on language. Instead of saying, I was trying to ignore what was happening outside and focusing on the more important happening inside the room, he chooses the word byplay. A smooth sequence of events is leading to climax. We do not see heroic action here, rather, a thudding sound shows that something unpleasant awaits. We see more dialogue towards the end as most of the action has already happened. The story ends on a lighter note and a message for the readers. It is very important to plan your conclusion before you start writing your story. You can end your story both by either tying up all the loose ends of your story, or you may keep the readers guessing on what will happen next. Conclusion is the last part of your story, and it is very important that you, as a writer, have planned the ending.